A year ago, I thought I was doing everything right. Raised beds, tomatoes, peppers, herbs along the fence. The backyard looked productive. Neighbors even said things like, "You could feed a whole family with that." I believed it. Then one week, just as an experiment, I tried to eat only from what my backyard produced. No grocery store, no backup, just what I had grown. Day 1 was fine, day 2 was fine. By day 3, I was eating cucumber for the third meal in a row and doing math in my head. And trust me, cucumber math is depressing. By day 5, I was genuinely hungry. The harvest that looked like abundance in photos was running out mid-week. That week changed the way I think about everything I had planted, because what I realized was uncomfortable. A productive-looking garden and a food system that sustains a household are not the same thing, not even close. And most people never find that out until it matters. Here is what happened, and what it taught me about the difference between growing food and building food security. The first thing that became obvious was calories. Tomatoes, lettuce, cucumbers, herbs. These are the things most people plant first. They look great, they taste great. But if you're gardening for sustenance, a tomato is just expensive water with seeds. A full pound has 80 calories. You'd need 25 pounds to get through one day. So even with a generous harvest, those beds were producing volume without producing sustenance. Nobody talks about that when they show off their garden on social media. The harvest looks impressive in a photo. But if someone had to live on it, they would lose weight fast. I could see the harvest sitting there, but I could also feel, almost immediately, that it wasn't enough. Up until that point, I was still thinking like a gardener, not like someone building a food system. Once the calorie problem was clear, the next realization hit. The garden had no structure. There was no plan behind what got planted where, no thinking about what produces through summer and into fall, and nothing stored for winter. It was seasonal decoration, not a food system. I had 6 different tomato varieties that season, 6, and the total harvest across all of them fed us for maybe 4 days. One variety, planted in volume, would have produced the same result in half the space and given me something worth preserving. A food system thinks in months, not in weekends. It accounts for gaps between harvests. It includes storage. It includes crops that dry well, preserve easily, or keep producing over a long stretch. Most backyard gardens skip all of that because the goal was never food security. The goal was fresh tomatoes in July. Good goal. But not the same as being prepared. The transition took 1 full growing season to feel different and 2 to feel solid. That is worth saying up front because nothing here is a weekend project. The first year is mostly unlearning. The shift started when the planting changed. Potatoes went in first the following season. And that was one of the first real surprises. I remember lifting the first few plants and realizing the weight in the soil was much more than I expected. One 10-foot row of potatoes can produce 50 to 75 pounds of food in about 90 days. That is serious caloric output from a small footprint. Dry beans came next. A single 4x8 raised bed of bush beans grown in 2 rounds over a season can produce enough dried beans to fill a shelf for winter. Dried beans store for a year or more in sealed jars, no refrigeration needed. That shelf becomes the buffer, the thing that means a bad harvest week does not become a crisis. These are not glamorous crops. Nobody takes pictures of dried pinto beans for social media, but they are the kind of crops that change the math. Most people miss this part. The crops that keep a family fed are not the crops that look best in a basket. Sweet potatoes took another row. Winter squash filled a corner. Squash cures at room temperature for 2 weeks after harvest, and then keeps for 3 to 6 months in a cool, dry space. No canning, no freezing, no equipment. A small grain like amaranth or sorghum got a trial spot. The amaranth was a mess to harvest the first time, took twice as long as expected, and I lost maybe a third of it. But it conditioned the soil in a way nothing else had. None of this was complicated. It did not require a farm. It required a different set of priorities. Instead of asking what is fun to grow, the question became what would reduce a grocery bill or keep a family going for 2 weeks if the store was not an option. That one question changed the entire layout. The food itself was only one part of the lesson. The bigger realization was about rhythm. A food system is not a one-time project. It is a cycle. Compost feeds the soil grows the food, scraps go back into compost, seeds get saved from one harvest and planted the next. Water gets managed instead of wasted. Each piece connects. When a backyard starts working as a loop instead of a one-directional project, the output per square foot goes up, and the dependency on outside inputs goes down. That is what separates a garden from a system. I remember standing in the backyard around September, looking at potatoes curing on a table, beans drying on a rack, squash sitting in the shade waiting to be stored. It did not look like a photo shoot, but it looked like food security. It looked like 3 or 4 weeks of meals sitting right there, grown from about 300 square feet, from the same small space that used to produce mostly salad. That feeling is quieter than excitement. It is the knowledge that if something went sideways tomorrow, the household would not be starting from zero. On the counterintuitive part, the system that produced more food took less daily work than the old garden. The old garden needed constant watering, weeding, pest management. The new setup used mulch heavily, grouped plants by water needs, and focused on crops that mostly take care of themselves once established. Potatoes and squash do not need daily attention. Dry beans grow without drama. Sweet potatoes spread and suppress their own weeds. The old garden was high effort, low output. The new system flipped that ratio. There is one mistake that quietly ruins the whole setup, though, and it is not what most people expect. It is not pests. It is not soil. It is planting too many varieties without enough volume of any one thing. A single tomato plant, a single pepper plant, a single squash vine. Each one produces a handful of meals at most. I pick 1 or 2 crops and go deep. Volume is what creates a harvest worth storing. Variety is fine once the calorie base is covered, but most beginners spread too thin and end up with a little of everything and not enough of anything. The backyard that works for food security does not need to be large. A space of 200 to 400 square feet, managed with the right priorities, can change how a family relates to food. A rough breakdown: 100 square feet of potatoes, a 4x8 bed of dry beans planted twice, 1 row of sweet potatoes, and 2 or 3 winter squash plants. That footprint, managed well, produces somewhere between 150 and 200 pounds of storable food in a season. It does not replace the grocery store entirely, but it reduces the dependency in a way that feels solid and measurable. There is a guide called the Backyard Miracle Farm System that walks through how to set it up step by step. If that sounds useful, the link is in the pinned comment. But the core lesson here does not require any guide. It requires a shift in thinking. Stop asking what is fun to grow. Start asking what would feed your family if the store closed for 2 weeks. Start with calories. Start with crops that store. Start with a system that cycles instead of one that just produces. The backyard that changed the most was not the one that got more plants. It was the one where someone finally asked the right question. What part of food security feels most overlooked to you? Drop it in the comments. If this way of thinking makes sense, subscribe and stick around. There is a lot more to cover about turning a regular backyard into something that actually matters.